How do you deal with your imposter syndrome? Do you push it under the carpet and just get your head down and push through? Does it control everything you do, or do you turn it into your superpower? I want to share with you a different way of looking at an imposter syndrome that might just change your attitude towards it a little bit. And I say this as somebody who has struggled with imposter syndrome her entire adult life. Even today, yes, I'm on this podcast and I can tell you this morning I experienced imposter syndrome, but what I did was I turned it into my superpower. So without further ado, let's dive on in to turning imposter syndrome into a secret weapon. Meet Sandra. Sandra could be actually any of my clients, I feel like, including myself, but I have a particular lady in mind. She is someone who says to me fairly regularly, someone's going to figure out how bad I am. I don't belong here. I'm just waiting for them to figure this out. Now, we've had a lot of conversations about this over the last 12 months since she started working with me. And I have this conversation pretty much on a nearly daily basis, definitely multi times a week with different clients. And what happens is they are feeling this way. And although they know it's not serving them to feel this way, it impacts them. They are not speaking up in meetings. When they do speak up, they apologize. They're always second guessing whether or not somebody trusts them, whether somebody believes them. Did that person say that because they don't think I'm capable? When they get bad or constructive feedback, as we should be calling it, whether that's in an interview situation or in the workplace, they take it so personally, it stops them progressing. They get rejected from a job. They're like, I can never do this job. And they'll go back to another lady's experience this week of, I need to apply for a job that's less than the one I want because there are just no jobs out there I can get for right now. The competition's too high. I'm not good enough. That is a form of imposter syndrome in its own right. When we have imposter syndrome, all too often, it so cripples us that our IQ actually measurably drops. Our self-esteem goes down. We spend very valuable cognition space, that space in your brain, that ability to compute, to rationalize, to solve problems. We spend valuable time thinking about what others think about us, rather than realizing most of us don't think about each other that much. It's very fleeting. We spend far more time thinking about what other people think about us than we do thinking about ourselves, if that makes sense. And I want to today address your feelings. I want to help you know how to be more supportive of yourself. And I want you to realize that you can have a breakthrough here. Here's what I personally experienced with imposter syndrome. I spent almost every day up until my mid-30s experiencing imposter syndrome. Today, it's not every day. But I'm definitely one of those. I say to my clients, there are some of us who can let go of imposter syndrome. It might come back again, but you can let go of it. And there are some of us, like myself, I think it's so embedded in my personality. And I have hypothesis for why, but I don't really know why. But it's so embedded in my personality, it's not going anywhere. And what it took for me was realizing that my imposter syndrome could be something that allowed me to do and see things that others couldn't. And rather than praying, hoping, believing everybody said you will let go of it eventually, rather than holding on to that and being really upset that it wasn't going anywhere, I went, you know what, that's okay. What can I do with it instead? And it took having a supportive environment. It took seeing what I am worth and reframing my imposter syndrome. So I now have imposter feelings come up, but I control the narrative instead of dismissing them, instead of trying to push them out of the way. And I say this with almost every negative emotion that clients bring to me, whether that's fear, anger, shame. And imposter syndrome kind of is very fear-based, but it can be all of them. Instead of dismissing it and telling yourself, oh, that's irrational, that's silly, which when somebody says to you, just let go of that, you're basically dismissing it and saying that's silly. And that for me just made it worse. It got louder, it shouted louder in my mind. I couldn't just dismiss it. And instead, I've embraced it, and then I can control the narrative. So I want you today, if this is resonating with you, I want you today to recognize your imposter syndrome as a way to extraordinary performance. And that's what I've done. It gets me out of bed in the morning. It helps me see things that others do not see. It catalyzes direction of travel. It allows me to understand situations that others don't. It is part of who I am. And this is so cliche, but I love myself now. And that has taken me so many years to be able to say. It doesn't make me an asshole. I don't love myself to the point of I'm perfect. I'm definitely not perfect. But every part of me has got me to where I am today. And I'm pretty damn happy with where I am today. Even when life is tough, life is hard, I am pretty happy and comfortable. So I want you to recognize this can be true for you too. If your imposter syndrome is crippling, let's turn this into a source of extraordinary performance. If that isn't you, if you're one of these people who is able to let go of her imposter syndrome, I applaud you. I would cheer you on. I want that for everybody, because I still think I would have an easier life, maybe, if that was me. And so if that is you, fabulous, amazing. I cheer you on. But please still listen to this, because it might tell you a little bit about what's going on with some of those around you when they are just not behaving the way you want them to. Maybe it's imposter syndrome. I actually think a lot of bad behavior is caused by fear. And I include bro culture in that. I think a lot, not all, a lot of bro culture, a lot of things that we don't like, the aggressiveness, the butting in, the dismissing of others, is a form of fear. A great, confident leader has no need to dismiss others, doesn't need to shut others down. And so maybe if you listen to this, you might understand what's going on in some of your team. So let's talk about how your imposter syndrome can be the catalyst in your career. Now, when I work with clients, no two clients are coached in the same way. This is why I can put all the trainings out there in the world, this podcast, and yet I still have coaching clients, because there is no one size fits all when it comes to this work. But there are two things that every one of us needs to do more of. Have more love and compassion over criticism and avoidance. So what do I mean by that? You need to be kinder to yourself, have more compassion, more empathy and love for yourself and your feelings. Those things that you want to dismiss because they're uncomfortable. You want more of that and less of the criticism. Okay, that one's kind of obvious. Less of the avoidance. Now, the avoidance is really, really important here. When we don't like something, when we are fearful, when we're angry, when we're sad, when we're ashamed, what do? We go, I don't want to think about that. That's uncomfortable. I'm just going to push that into a corner. The classic one, all of us have seen somebody go through, and it's very easy to see this in others and not in ourselves. So the classic one we've all seen someone go through is grief. We've all known somebody who has lost someone or has lost a job, some form of fairly major grief. And those two things are both grief, very different. And what do? Rather than working through their grief, they push it away. And our society kind of rewards that. You think about the widow who is stoic, who just cracks on. She doesn't cry. And I say widow because I'm talking to women and that's what I do, but widower too. And she just doesn't emote. She's avoiding it. What if I told you instead that the best thing to do was to bring that front and center? Because we've also seen the person who 10 years later is still angry at a particular job they were laid off from, is still angry at a particular relationship they had, is still angry that life took away the love of their life. And it's 10 years later. And yeah, you have a right to be angry, but is it serving you? Probably not. If we avoid grief, it will keep staying there and it will get louder over time. Your relationships will suffer. The people who care deeply about you, they're going to feel pushed away, right? We've all experienced that, I think, anyway, of somebody who is so hurt that over time they push away those that are trying to hold them through their grief. And it comes about because they avoid their grief. They don't process it. It is too painful to face. Now, we really understand that with grief. If you've lost the love of your life, and my mum went through this last year. She lost the love of her life in 2023, not last year. It's 2025. I can't keep up with the years. And it hurt. I've never seen my mother so broken. And I really understand that, at least as much as I can, because the idea of losing the love of my life, it terrifies me. But at the same time, if you don't face that pain, it cripples you. It holds you back. So if we then move it away from the discussion of grief, that's a very easy one to understand because we've all seen it. We talk about anger, or we talk about shame, or we talk about fear. And fear is a big one when it comes to imposter syndrome. When we avoid it, when we say there's nothing to see here, then what happens is it actually gets bigger and you don't deal with it. And the second piece of that is criticism. And the classic with imposter syndrome is critiquing yourself for having these feelings. That's silly, Toni. Why are you thinking that? Stop worrying about that. That's not serving you. It is critiquing it. It is shutting it down. You should not feel this way. Why are you doing that? The other form of criticism, of course, is that internal narrative that is actually imposter syndrome itself. The imposter syndrome can manifest as a lot of criticism, can be so stifling. Like, you did that, you stupid woman, is a classic internal narrative. If I ever hear a client telling me that they think they're stupid, I'm like, whoa. We don't use that word around here. None of you are stupid or silly or ignorant. None of you. And we've got to stop using those words with ourselves. So when we are spending all our energy criticizing and or avoiding rather than being empathetic, understanding and compassionate, we are not moving through this negative emotion. And while you're in that state, it is doing you no favors, none at all. So the first thing I want you to do is face up to this uncomfortable emotion that you're experiencing. Now, the second thing I want you to do is get rid of the shame. Many of us believe it's something to overcome this imposter syndrome. Get rid of it. That creates so much pressure, and shame comes back to that criticism. You got to stop telling yourself you've got to overcome it or get rid of it. It is something to move through. Now, some of you will move all the way to the other side, and I applaud you. Some of you will be like me, and we just exist with it. It comes and it goes, it ebbs and it flows. It's like the tide. But while you say, I've got to get rid of it, I've got to overcome it, that's pressure, that's shame, it's not helping you. I want you to be less upset by it and more accepting of it. Don't dismiss it. It's not going to make it go away. Embrace it. So then, once you're able to embrace, you then get to be curious. While you're sitting in anxiety, shame, anger, dismissal, I've got to get through this, avoidance, you can't be curious. Now, the way you turn this into a superpower is to be curious. What insights does this bring you? This is the root of making your imposter your superpower. At the end of the day, imposter syndrome comes about because at some point in your life, it has served you. So for me, it's very stark. Imposter syndrome kept my head down. I was quite I still am very opinionated. I always have been opinionated. I have ideas. I can see things others don't. It's why I'm a good leader. It's why I'm a good coach. And I have a lot of opinions. But you know what? When you're a teenager, it doesn't go down well. When you're a teenager in a male-dominated field such as physics, which is what I studied, when you go to college, it really does not go down well to be that one who's opinionated, has ideas, puts her hand up. You get belittled, you get pushed out, you get told you're a geek, you get bullied. Oh yeah, all that happened to me. My imposter syndrome kept me quiet. I still had all those internal dialogue thoughts. I was still thinking, can nobody see the answer here? Really? This is not that complicated. I had all of that. And early on in my career too, I had does nobody else see where this is going? That internal narrative was a strong one. But I didn't get bullied. I didn't get hurt. So it served me. What it also did was level up my ability to understand the room. Because this was a reaction to getting bullied, including by negative situations with adults, in fact, as well. What it allowed me to do was to observe and really understand a room full of people. And that is then my superpower. That understanding where it's come from, how it served you, helps you see how it's also trained your thinking. Because if you've been on and off having imposter feelings over the years, maybe you've had a 10-year break and you started a new job and it's come back. That's a classic, right? There is probably something that's happened at some point. It could be very recent. It could be 20, 30 years ago, where something significant happened that meant you needed to reframe how you showed up. So you were protected. To protect yourself, you will have paid a lot of attention to something. And if you can figure out what that thing was, you can understand how it is that this can now be a superpower. You've got to, first of all, allow yourself to accept it has served you. It kept me safe. It stopped me being beaten up, right? My imposter syndrome is not a bad thing. And that allows me to be compassionate to myself rather than, you stupid woman, which is a classic that I used to tell myself. When you can do this, you have emotional management, which as an executive is paramount. You have to have emotional regulation. You have to transition very quickly from blame and shame to a more loving approach. You need to do this in seconds in an executive situation. You need to recognize imposter syndrome is making me not want to speak up. How is this serving me? And move quickly through to self-acceptance so you can unblock yourself. Now, this takes time. This takes training. It's what I coach people in. But I want you to get that. And I can certainly do that. And I have many clients who've got to this point where when I start working with them, that imposter syndrome is so crippling, they aren't going to move through it in a situation such as an executive meeting. But after a few months, they are able to do it right there and then. And some of them go on to it doesn't happen anymore. It might not happen until they start their next job, but they've got the same toolkit. So I want you to move into this space of recognizing what's gone on, the deliberate actions and choices, how it served you, transition from blame and shame to a more loving approach and self-acceptance. And then you get to sharpen your decision-making because it's your superpower. When you have feelings of inadequacy, it's going to level up your emotional intelligence and understanding. You can control and rationalize. When you can't control the feeling not good enough, what I want you to do is be thinking, well, why do I not feel good enough? What is this telling me about the situation? And then we're going to reframe it. We're going to come to reframing in a minute. I want you to be thinking about, what is this inadequacy telling you about the room? What is it about your emotional intelligence? How can you understand the fear you've got and ask yourself, well, how can I present this thing I'm thinking about saying in such a way that I'm not going to be laughed at? Rather than giving into it and not speaking up, use it to understand what words have not worked for me in the past. It's really about slowing down and having that ability to sharpen yourself up. I had a conversation not that long ago with a brilliant executive of engineering, the head of engineering, over 100 developers under her. And she said to me, like it was months after we started working together, she's like, I have a confession, Toni. I still feel like I'm waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here. I mean, this woman was a top performer, and yet she had this chronic self-doubt. And this is where I really want you, if you're not experiencing this yourself, to really look around the people around you. And when you're judging them for not performing or not saying enough or saying too much, saying too little, what is it that's in their head that's meaning they're behaving that way? Most of us question ourselves some of the time. I actually think it's quite healthy. And when you have this realization, it can be incredibly freeing. Most people question themselves. It tips into imposter syndrome when it cripples you. And what I'm saying is you can tip it back out again. Now, the cool thing about having these imposter feelings and why it's your superpower is you're going to get them more often, right? All of us question ourselves. That's healthy. Imposter syndrome means you're questioning yourself a lot more, and you've got this internal narrative of I'm going to be found out. I have to do this myself. I have to be perfect. I have to, all the things, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? But when you realize that actually questioning ourselves is healthy, you can then flip this and say, I'm questioning myself. What wisdom can I get from this? How can I grow from this? Is there a decision I should be double checking that my imposter syndrome is flagging up, which can lead to better outcomes? Right? Here's where I see imposter syndrome as your superpowers. First of all, your growth of gap knowledge is huge. Imposter syndrome often is your intuition pointing out a gap. I want you to see where there's a gap in your approach to something, a gap in the words that are coming out, a gap in the pursuit of what you're trying to achieve. There's a gap piece. Your imposter syndrome is going bing, 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 because there's a gap. And maybe you're like, I don't see the gap, but maybe some part of you knows that other people are not as far ahead as you are. I think this is a classic when we're speaking. It is so easy for us to skip steps and leave our audience behind, and they just spend all their time critiquing because they're back at stage 1 and you're on stage 5. So what is the gap? What is the gap both in your thinking? What is the gap in how you're going to communicate? Fuel your awareness of gaps with your imposter syndrome. Where are the gaps? The second superpower from imposter syndrome is a little bit of a push. So I do not believe in perfectionism. And indeed, one of the problems with imposter syndrome is the perfectionist, right? And I definitely suffered from this majorly early in my career. I remember my PhD advisor having to put his foot down because I was just not sharing with him my draft of my first paper. It's been like 8 months. And it's because I was terrified of not giving him something perfect, because I was terrified of the feedback. It didn't help that when I did eventually give it to him, it literally came back. There was more red pen than there was black typing. That really did not help. But I hope you can see here that when we have perfectionist traits, they can also fuel us. So today, I don't give in to my perfectionist tendencies. Good is good enough. What I do is I reframe it to perfect is what I need to deliver today, right now, on time, on target, to budget. Perfect is not keeping going. That's not perfect. That is imperfect because it's late in some way, or it's over budget, or it's not serving my client because it's late or over budget. So you want to have a reframe, but here's the thing. It motivates you towards excellence. If you have self-doubt, imposter syndrome, if you have perfectionism, imposter syndrome, you are going to prepare more thoroughly. You're going to work hard. For somebody like me who's got a little bit of ADHD going on, it can push me through my ADHD crippling, the bit where I can't work. My motivation for excellence, when I reframe this perfectionist, the need to be better than everybody else, the need to stand out, it produces high quality outcomes. And this is so important. What you want to make sure is that you use this in the right place. So this works really well when the lady I was talking about at the beginning, Sandra, not her real name. She was one of these women who was just so rigorous in her preparation for everything. The problem was that she was using it in the wrong ways. When she started turning this rigor to strategic imperatives, it created significant changes in her career. Before that, she was being rigorous about every Slack message she sent, about every email she sent, irrespective of who. What we needed to do was allow her to slow down enough to say, do I need to be excellent with this particular thing? No? Okay, great. Where can I make myself more rigorous? She moved that motivation for excellence from something that was holding her back to something that was pushing her forward. The next superpower of imposter syndrome is empathy and humility. So many of us, that imposter syndrome goes bling, bling, bling when we are in a situation where we're reading the room and the room is saying something negative. Now, the imposter syndrome turns that inside and goes, you're a bad person, you're stupid. We have that second guessing, like people don't believe us, don't trust us, they're shutting me down. But what it actually is a huge amount of empathy. Now, what can happen is if we recognize it as that's an unhelpful outcome, but my empathy is useful, you can see better what is going on in this room. And I see this all the time with my husband, and I'm so glad he doesn't listen to this podcast. I will read a room. I'll be like, I'm pretty sure this thing's going on. He's like, no, that's not going on at all. And I just like gently adjust our, interaction with a particular person. This happened not like long ago at a coffee shop. We bumped into a friend and I was like, they're having a bad day. And I just gave them space. I didn't do my normal exuberant self. I just gave them a bit more space. It was a very tiny adaptation, but it just meant I wasn't putting my emotional needs on that person that day, right? It would have just seemed like any other day to that person, but there was no demand from me. And I'm quite an exuberant person, right? If they had reciprocated in such a way that they were engaged, I would have changed. And my husband totally thought I was like overreaching. And I was like, well, there's no harm. Like, I'm not damaging this relationship here. And they don't need to know that I'm concerned. It's up, if they want to have a chat about it, they'll come to me. A couple of days later, that person's wife came to me. It's like, oh, thank you for being so kind with so-and-so. And I was like, it's not a big deal. They just needed a bit of space that day. And I didn't even know that she'd recognize this. And so it's just really nice to know that I could see that and give that person that gift. That came about because my internal dialogue was, oh, he's pissed at me. Oh yeah, that was my internal dialogue. My imposter syndrome said, he's pissed at me. What have I done wrong? I'm a terrible human. And then I slowed down. I turned on my executive presence, which is always there, even when I'm not at work. Even in the coffee shop, it is just part of who I am. And I said, wait, hold on. Slow down. This is not about me. This person is just having a moment. What can I do to make their life easier in this moment? Which actually makes my life easier because I'm then not creating tension that this person just doesn't need and would hurt my relationship with them. I don't need anything from them in this moment. Why am I demanding it? When we can do that, we go in with more humility because we're more empathetic. We open up to recognize our own vulnerabilities and also the vulnerabilities of others. It is such a powerful leadership trait that fosters trust, collaboration, and just moves everything forward faster because you're not pushing the wrong button. So lean into your imposter syndrome telling you something about the situation and just make sure that when you feel that, you go, thanks, imposter syndrome. Let's make it about this person rather than about myself. Okay. The next one is diverse perspectives. When we are constantly questioning our own abilities, it encourages us to seek more opinions, which can lead to more innovation and broader thinking. So we all know Team IQ, I hope you know this, Team IQ outperforms individual IQ every time, but only when all the perspectives are heard. As somebody who has imposter syndrome, you may find yourself thinking, I don't know everything, I'm stupid, I'm missing something, all those things. When that happens, again, your intuition might be onto something. Might not be, but it might be. So rather than dismissing it, embrace it, thank it, and then say, what could I be missing? Where could I get another opinion to give me some insight and either validate that I'm missing something or allow me to move forward with intention? Now, there is a danger line here, which is, I say to a lot of my clients, this is not a democracy. You at work, you are not in a democracy. You could debate whether we're in a democracy. That's a whole other conversation, not for this podcast. But the workplace in the current capitalist society is not a democracy. At which point, as a leader, sometimes you should not be asking for diverse opinions unless you're going to act on them. But while you're trying to understand a situation, while you're trying to make a good decision, there is a place for getting opinions as long as you don't commit to doing anything with those opinions. Remember, opinions are just that, and you're going to get conflicting ones. You cannot fulfill everybody's opinions when they conflict. It's impossible. So what you do is you survey the situation. You say, I'd love to know other opinions on this. I'd love to know what you're thinking so I can get a more well-rounded view of the situation. When you do that, you will think more broadly. You are going to think more collaboratively. You're going to think outside the box because you are going to see things that others don't. And when you take this into consideration, even if you don't take forward everything that everybody says, there is a way to do it such that people feel more valued, which brings me to that empathy, humility, all of that kind of stuff. So this is an opportunity for you to say, wait, hold on, I'm second guessing myself here about whether or not I'm making the right decision and saying, is my intuition telling me something that I need to get a bit more data? You have to watch out for this crippling progress, right? A lot of what I do with clients is tell them to just make a decision. You can always change your decision later. This is something we do not talk about enough because we vilify people in society who change their opinions, who change their decisions. We should make a decision, move forward. And as we get more data, we can always pivot. What's wrong is when we do flip-flops every single week, right? And I've experienced that one firsthand. It is crippling. It's awful. It's terrifying. But not ever changing your opinion or your decision is just as bad, if not worse. So if in doubt, make a decision, get opinions. And if something genuinely does need changing, you can update at that point. And then the final, fifth transformation that you can get from imposter syndrome that makes this a superpower is resilience building. You might be thinking, what? Hold on a second. Imposter syndrome helps my resilience. Yes, it does. Here's the thing. If you are dealing with imposter syndrome day in, day out, you have to be resilient as hell to do that, my love. Dealing with imposter syndrome makes you resilient. Now, if you then learn how to channel this using those 5 things I've just been talking about, awareness of gaps, turn it into an understanding of gaps, motivation for taking excellent action, use your self-doubt to understand where you can lead things to better quality outcomes, empathy and humility, learning how to enhance your empathy and be more humble as a result, having more diverse perspectives because you are seeking those opinions because your intuition is saying something missing here. When you do that, you can then use the resilience that you've built over years of tackling your imposter syndrome to deal with other things, because you suddenly won't need as much resilience as you've been using up. Resilience is a resource. It's impacted by a lot of different things. I like to view it as a big bucket, right? When you have a good night's sleep, it fills back up again. Bad night's sleep, not so much. When you go away on vacation, it fills up and it starts overflowing. When you have an argument with your spouse, your resilience goes down. Your resilience is a resource that's refilled by good, nourishing activities from being with friends to having a good night's sleep to eating a good meal, and is emptied by challenging things. That doesn't make them bad, they're just challenging. You are less resilient at the end of the day than you are at the beginning of the day. Now, if you are better equipped for using less resilience resource because you're much quicker at flipping your internal narrative, then you are using less of this resource that you've trained yourself, because you can also, over time, make this bucket bigger. You can do this through things like meditation. You get a bigger bucket. You can do this through working, like through practice, right? I think if you've dealt with imposter syndrome your entire life, if you haven't burnt out, you have stretched that bucket and made it bigger, which means you have a lot more to go around, which means you can make better decisions. You are better able to handle challenges because your imposter syndrome has been so challenging. So if we can move through your imposter syndrome in a healthier way, like I've just been describing, you are going to emerge stronger, because now you use a very small amount of resilience to just flip that narrative and understand what it's telling you instead of how it's holding you back. I want you to start with a few things to really flip your narrative. First of all, when your brain says, I don't know enough, I want you to flip that into, I'm going to go find this out. Encourage proactive learning. When you say to yourself, I got lucky there, I never want you using the phrase lucky, good luck or bad luck. No. There's no luck in this world. Stop. I want you to own it. I created this opportunity. If it's so-called bad luck, I want you to say, I learned from this situation. Shift the focus to agency and effort. Effort in particular, because you can do an awful lot with grit and grind. I do believe that things can be easier, but that starts with our mindset. And agency. Stop making this something that's happened to you. Own it. And when you have that, they're going to realize I don't belong here. They're going to find me out. Bring it along to, I have a unique perspective. I see things other people don't. I need to share my voice in this room because that's why I'm here. Promote your self-worth, promote your confidence. I want you to do one more action for me off the back of this podcast. I want you to start seeing what you've done well. I get all my clients and my team to do daily and weekly wins. My team meetings, even though they've put their wins in Slack every week, we have a company meeting, we're a small enough team right now, we can still start with everybody shares their biggest wins from the last month. We have a company meeting once a month and everybody starts with what they are celebrating the most. So I want you starting to celebrate the wins, regardless of how big or small they are. As a coach, I actually think the small stuff is more to be celebrated. Of course, we're going to celebrate the big things, the landing a job, the promotion, standing on stage, but it's actually the small things that get us there. So I love celebrating with a client that she has spoken up in a meeting for the first time. I love celebrating with a client that she just did a hard thing. I love celebrating with a client that she had a tough day yesterday, but she got out of bed this morning. That is the stuff that is so important to recognize, because those things, when we acknowledge the accomplishment that those things bring, we are more likely to do it over and over and shift our internal narrative from I don't know enough to I can find that out, from I got lucky to I created this opportunity, from they're going to think I don't belong here to I have something to bring to this table. I want you to do that. I want you to be thinking about how you can gather the evidence of how your imposter syndrome is supporting you and start recognizing, build that self-awareness, flip the narrative, and turn this into your superpower. Now, all that said and done, I want to end on a very, very important note. Me telling you that your imposter syndrome is a superpower is not an excuse to allow imposter syndrome. I know I've just been saying it's your superpower, but your imposter syndrome can spur growth, but it is not a state to embrace. Everything I've just been talking about with resilience in particular is about saying, let's spend less time acknowledging our imposter syndrome and instead go, oh, thank you, imposter syndrome, and moving forward. I do not want your imposter syndrome to be an accepted state you stay in. I want it to be something you accept is who you are, if it is who you are like me, but something you move through, something you reframe, something you say, thank you very much for keeping me safe. I've got that. Thank you. Let's move on. It is not something to succumb to. It is not inevitable. It is part of who you are, but it's not who you are indelibly. So your doubts don't define your capabilities. Your doubts don't define you. Your doubts don't dictate how far you're going to go. Your doubts don't hold you here. They also don't put you there. Your doubts are just doubts. They're nothing else. They are a narrative that you can choose to do something with. You can choose to ignore and they'll get bigger, or you can choose to listen and say thank you very much and move forward. But this is not an excuse to stay an imposter. This is not an excuse to sit in that feeling of I don't belong. This is what you need potentially to say, I'm going to start doing something different starting today. Let me know if this is helping you move through your imposter syndrome in a more powerful way. I would love to hear your take on imposter syndrome. As always, drop me a DM on LinkedIn, give me a comment on YouTube, and please do like and subscribe. That helps us meet more women who need to hear this conversation. Until next time, remember, stay on your tech leadership game and follow your dreams, because the world really does need that uniqueness that you bring as a leading woman in tech.